But now let's turn and just briefly consider. We looked at what God requires. He requires that it center on His Word. He requires that we do it diligently. He requires that we do it continually. He requires that fathers not provoke their children, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. And that means the Scriptures are the center. Now let's look and see what God says don't do. All right, He said this is what you're not to do. All right? Let's go back to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 18:9. Moses tells the people how the children are not to be trained, how the people are not to be trained. He says, when you come into the land which the Lord your God is giving you, remember this is Deuteronomy, he says this is the same discourse, this is sort of the same sermon, if you will. You shall not learn to follow the abominations of those nations. So he's saying, you are to learn my word. You are to learn my morals. That is to be the foundation of your moral education and the overall template of your non-moral education, your subject matter, subjects in school and skills. And so all my word is to influence and guide all of that. But when you get there, you're not to learn to follow the abominations of those nations. All right. Learn to follow, to be taught in, to be become accustomed to, skillful in by exercise and practice. Okay, so let's talk about something. A lot of confusion today about what it means to be a Christian in terms of the way you interact with the world. It does not mean, as an adult believer, that you do not and cannot interface with unbelievers. What it means is you are not to do it so much, to such a degree, and such a long period of time, and such a repetitious amount of instances that it becomes your pattern now. All right? You are to go out and engage the lost world and be a witness. And this is one of the reasons that it's so important that you become and stay in a church, a local church, because you need to come back into the church, be around people who believe what you believe, who are trying to follow the same things that you're trying to follow, and be built back up. Because if you stay out there long enough, you will do exactly what he says here. You will learn to follow the abominations of those nations. All right, you're not to learn the abominations. That doesn't mean you can't learn what they are. That doesn't mean you don't understand what Baalism is. That it means that you are not integrating with Baal so much that you start to follow and obey Baals and the kinds of godless things that the lost do. But it's interesting because in that passage in Deuteronomy, he says, just before they're entering the land, he says, don't learn to follow their ways. But we're not going to jump now. We're going to jump to Psalm 106, and we're going to look at what they actually did. In Deuteronomy 6, he's saying, learn my word, focus on my word. And then over in Deuteronomy 18, he says, oh, by the way, don't learn to follow the pagans. Now let's jump ahead or jump into the future several hundred years and see what they did. The consequences of learning to follow. And I'm telling you this because I'm trying to set the stage for you to understand why public education is so bad for your children spiritually and morally. So Psalm 106. This is what they actually did. This is a record of their obedience. They did not destroy the peoples concerning whom the Lord had commanded them. So he said, stay away from these Baals, destroy all the people, and stay away from their abominations. But they mingled with the Gentiles and learned their works. They served their idols, which became a snare to them. They even sacrificed their sons and their daughters to demons and shed innocent blood, the blood of their sons and daughters. So instead of obeying Deuteronomy 6 and 18, they flipped it around completely. And they did not learn to follow the ways of the Lord. They learned to follow the ways of the abominable idols in the land. And eventually what happened was they actually sacrificed their children to those idols. They literally burned their children alive in an effort to please these pagan deities. But let's look at this progression here. I want you to see a progression. There is a descent that happens that is laid out here in these 4 words. I would suggest to you, brothers and sisters, that without knowing it, and I look down on no one, I take no pleasure in having to say this, I'm brokenhearted and destroyed just as all of you are. But I would suggest to you that what has happened to these 88% of our children is, in a spiritual sense, they have been sacrificed. That we have learned ourselves as parents the ways of the pagans so much, how our children are trained, how they're educated, what we're to do with them and not do with them, what we've learned from the pagans about women going out in the workplace instead of staying home with the children. Well, all of these things are the ways of the pagans. They're the ways of the godless. And we have learned that so much, and we have not known Scripture so much, that we ourselves have sacrificed our own children to these pagan deities, and we simply did not know it. Let's look here and we'll see this. Let's look at this descent down to sacrificing children. First, they mingled. They mingled. That doesn't mean they had an occasional discussion with a lost person on the corner. That doesn't mean that they didn't go out evangelizing, have friends at work that they were trying to evangelize. That's not what it means. It means that they became completely integrated with them. They married lost people. They went to lost parties. They went to lost temples. They totally integrated themselves into the lost culture. They mingled. And then they learned. When you get together with other people, when you hear their words all the time at work, you know, for those of you who are young Christians and you're going to work for the first time, you have to recognize that you're being put into a position where you have to integrate and mingle with the lost. And you have to watch out. You have to go out and work. You know, that's not evil mingling. But you have to look out, because as you're mingling, you're learning. And if you're not coming back to the Scriptures, if you're not coming back to godly people in the church and so on, you're going to learn those ways. So you mingle, and then you learn, and then you serve. Then you start to do the things that you've learned. So you interact, associate, and then you learn. This is your mind. And from the mind flows the actions. And then you begin to serve those idols. And then, what's the last one here? You can tell it. You're lost. You're sacrificed. This is what happens in public schools. We send the children out from the time they're 6 weeks old, and they're being mingling, and they're learning from their little friends, and they're learning from their teachers the godlessness of the culture. And they go to school at kindergarten at 5 years old, and they're all the way up to 18. And then what happens? They're lost. They're lost because they mingled for 15, 16 years. They learned for 15, 16 years, and then they begin to serve. And then they're lost. And in the final analysis of it, fathers, you are the ones who did it. You sent them there, and you, whether you knew it or not, the fact of the matter is they were sacrificed because you had followed the ways of Baal instead of the ways of God. Now look what happens here. Therefore the wrath of the Lord was kindled against His people, so that He abhorred His own inheritance, and He gave them into the hand of the Gentiles, and those who hated them ruled over them. There is no one more upset about the loss of our children than God Himself, because, as I said, these are His children. Look at it here. It says the wrath of the Lord was kindled. The Lord sees these statistics. He knows them better than we do. He doesn't need to have Barna look them up or Ken Ham to do a research study. God knows exactly the number that have been lost. And He is angry over this because it is preventable. But that is not to say that there is a perfect way to train a child and that they will never go off astray. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that God has established a pattern. And if we follow that pattern, more times than not, it will work out the way that it's supposed to. And if it doesn't, then we know that God intended for it to go off the rails for a purpose that we at that time don't understand. But when we start off doing it all wrong, and then it ends up crashing and burning, we have no one to blame but ourselves. I heard someone say one time, we're talking about God's ability to turn a bad situation around. And the phrase that he used was, God can hit a straight lick with a crooked stick. God can hit a straight lick with a crooked stick. Essentially what he was saying is God can make something that's done wrong or bad turn out right. And certainly God can. And there have been times when He did it with me. I was not raised properly. I was not raised Christian, but He took a crooked stick and He made something out of it. All right, but that doesn't mean, my response to that is always, that doesn't mean we go around making crooked sticks. God has commanded us to make them straight. And if we, out of our weakness, out of circumstances, end up making it crooked, then He can fix it. But we need to be doing it the way that He said to do it. And that we're under judgment now. We're under judgment now. Look at the children that have been lost. This is judgment, brothers and sisters. Look at, He says here that He will give His people into the hand of the Gentiles, and those who hate them will rule over them. Anybody feeling ruled over by the homosexual activists? Anybody feeling ruled over by the liberal, godless media, the liberal, godless politicians and politics and lawmakers? Anybody feeling put under their thumb and forced to do things we don't want to do, forced to endure things we don't want to endure? That's part of the judgment. And so we need to turn back to God.